Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming along to another Real Learners webinar. I wanted to say welcome aboard to anybody who came aboard last time we tried to run this webinar. We had one of those moments, well, I did anyway, where you sort of, when you when everything goes haywire in front of you and you're absolutely convinced that it was something you did, but you're not sure what. That was the moment I had, and I was like, what did I press? What did I press? As the whole of GoToWebinar seemed to explode before my very eyes. Well, first it froze and then it seems to explode. And I learned that afterwards, with a little bit of investigation, it wasn't me. There was a big platform crash on the whole GoToWebinar, and anybody who happened a couple of weeks ago to be on a webinar at the time that we were running our first attempt to run Conduct would have found themselves with exactly the same situation. So even though it's not my fault, I apologise. Sorry that you wasted your time. And to the people who've come back today, I really appreciate you, I guess, first of all, stepping back into our space. But I secondly congratulate you, I suppose, for being the sort of people who are really into this notion of the way that people conduct themselves. It has become, I think, my unofficial, my unintentional PhD is observing and learning about the way that people treat each other when they're in a working or even a learning environment. I think it's happened for me over a really long period of time. For those of you who might be on the webinar for the very first time today, you may not be aware that my background is as a teacher and a school principal, and that may have initially just sent a little shiver down the spine that you're dealing with a school principal today. Fear not, you can't get detention from me. And I think that what being a teacher and a school principal has led me to is that PhD, as I said, in human conduct, the way that people treat each other when they're being asked to do things that they would rather not. So the skills and the knowledge and the strategy that's required by a teacher to get a 9-year-old boy to do fractions isn't all that dissimilar to the skill set required by a manager or a leader to be able to get somebody to actually lift their weight at work, to be a decent team member, to hit deadlines, to be productive, to be creative, and to be cooperative in the way that they work. And I guess that word conduct has, for me, slowly emerged over a period of time, and it's taken, I guess for a really long time I've talked about behaviour. I've talked about the way that people express themselves, and often that's poorly in a workplace. And I think that the problem with discussing the word behaviour in isolation is that it treats behaviour in isolation. It's one person doing something and we would like them to do something different, and it pays not enough respect to the place that they're demonstrating that behaviour in. So conduct for me envelops context. It says that we're going to pay attention to the way that people are treating each other, and specifically we're going to pay attention to the way that people are treating each other at work, in your workplace. And I think that when we even just word it like that, people go, yeah, that's actually what I'm after. I sort of don't care how badly Barry behaves when he's down at the footy club on the weekend. And look, the truth is, one of the things we're going to talk about today is the context of conduct. And context, I want to put it right out there now. The place that you are in, the location that you are in, is the single most influential driver of somebody's behaviour that you can possibly have something to do with. Yeah, we try to work on Bob's behaviour. What we really need to work on is Bob's context. I know that for myself, I have a really good mate called Cameron, and whenever we go to his place for a barbecue, we went to that horrible moment where you find yourself going to other people's, your really good friends' children's 21st birthday parties. I went to Cameron's 21st, his son Zane's 21st birthday party just a couple of weeks ago. And Anthea always, my darling wife, always comments how Cameron has a very unique way of speaking. He sort of has this low voice, and there's this upward inflection on the end of every sentence. And it's very strange when you first meet him. You just think, what's going on there? Yet, by the end of an evening together, we're all talking that way. And Anthea notices it nearly every single time that we end up all talking like Cameron, particularly the males in the group. And so what that's telling us is that the context, the place that we're in, the things we're hearing, the things we're seeing, our surroundings, our environment are driving the way that we behave. No one taught me to speak that way. yet I did. I'll speak differently later this afternoon when I head down to my local cricket club and hang around there in the afternoon. We speak differently when we enter a church. We might whisper. We speak differently when we're in the company of older people, say our grandparents. Context is absolutely everything when it comes to behaviour. So treating behaviour in isolation can be really fraught. Can be the wrong path to go down. And so what I want to do today is to give you, instead of some big highfalutin model that really has been designed so that someone who has sat down with a pen and paper and a PowerPoint slide can make themselves look clever. Because let's be really honest, when you're in the middle of some really poor conduct in your workplace, you cannot remember the 9 principles of effective leadership and the 6 concentric circles that drive each of them and the 7 pies pieces within that circle. There's way too much to remember in a really fancy model. But you can draw upon when that comes along. What you need to do is to be fantastic manipulators of people's conduct. And so what I want to do is to give you some things that you can believe, that you can commit to being useful. And you'll notice there that I didn't say commit to being true, because if there is a truth here, it's that I don't actually care if your beliefs are true or not. Of all the people that we've got on the webinar today, we could have a room divided. We might have half the people in the room who believe in God and half the people in the room who don't. And the honesty is that I just don't care. I only care about whether that belief is serving you or not. We may have people in the room who think it's a terrible thing that on the weekend Richmond won the AFL Premiership. We might have people in the room who think that it's fantastic. I happen to be in the latter. and it really doesn't matter. It only matters whether your beliefs are useful to you. So I want to give you today some things that I think will be useful to you when you're looking to lead an improvement in conduct in your workplace. I think that you can isolate certain elements of conduct if you really want to. I think that you can teach resilience separately, but resilient workplaces are born by the conduct of people around each other, pushing each other into risk and being accepting of the fact that risk comes with the inherent mixture of failure and success. You can teach responsibility if you really want to. You can teach respect if you really want to, and it ain't going to change nothing. What we want is to be the sort of leader that generates change. And those leaders are the ones with strong working beliefs, with really useful beliefs about the way that people treat each other. And they deploy them. They use those beliefs in the way that they speak to each other, in the way that they lead. So should we get started, hey? I'm a firm believer, first of all, and before we get into, and I want to talk to you today about 4 different aspects that apply really specifically to the way people conduct themselves. But the first thing I want to ask is, how on earth did we get into this position where people conduct themselves so poorly? What's that about? Why is it that people behave and people treat each other so terribly in the workplace? And I think that first of all, we need to take some blame out of it. It's not about the people you work with, and it's not about you. We have been conditioned for a really long period of time now. For most of us, it's been happening all of our lives without us really knowing about it. We've been conditioned to be selfish. And mostly that's a media or a commercially driven imperative. If you look at the slogans that a lot of companies use, they're trying to tell you that you're the most special person in the world. Their kids growing up these days. I really feel for them, because they're hit with so many slogans that tell them that they're the center of the universe, that it's almost like, trying to counteract that at the dinner table of an evening is a waste of time, because they've been hit so many times during the day. If you think about how insidious slogans are, like "because you're worth it," which is a well-worn one by a famous cosmetic company, it's really just telling people you're in it for yourself. So when you assemble a group of people in a workplace and say, right, now we're going to work together as a team, the truth is they go in to fight for themselves. They act incredibly selfishly. It's a wonderful quote by a fellow called Daniel Goleman, who wrote Social Intelligence, The New Science of Human Relationships. And he said that self-absorption in all its forms kills empathy, let alone compassion. So just think about that for a moment. We're going to have a workplace where people are in there fighting for themselves. People are after number one. People are looking for my best interests. We're going to have a workplace where en masse we reduce empathy, so people's ability to know and to care about the way they treat other people, let alone compassion. let alone a little bit of understanding for the way that people work. Wow, how destructive is that as a force in your workplace when people have no compassion, no empathy, no understanding? Is it little wonder that we have challenges with the way that we work? Goleman goes on. He says, when we focus on ourselves, our world contracts as our problems and preoccupations loom large. So as we start to become more focused on self, our problems become bigger and we react more poorly to them. But when we focus on others, Goleman says, our world expands. Our own problems drift into the periphery of the mind and so seem smaller. And we increase our capacity for connection or compassionate action. So what Goleman's telling us, I believe, is that if you want to have a successful team at work, you've got to get really clear about helping people to be less selfish and more selfless. We've got to reward the selfless behaviour, and we've got to deprive of oxygen the chance to thrive those behaviours that we might call selfish. It's not about winning, it's not about losing. This is a really important thing to understand, because you might be in a competitive workplace where it's like, we've got to be the best, we've got to beat our competitors. The truth is that your ability to do that will be utterly reliant on your ability to collaborate effectively. How can you get people to collaborate effectively? Because while competition is going to exist, there are two things that it can be absolutely sure. A great friend of mine called Matt Church says that there are two keys to misery. One is expectations. If you expect that you're going to be the best, there's a really high chance that you're going to at some stage be horribly disappointed and ashamed of the failure. Again, if I was to use, because it's fresh in my mind, the AFL Premiership, out of 18 teams, only one. So 17 teams failed horrendously, and they would be miserable about that. And it's organisations that can flip that really quickly from misery into something that says, oh, well, that was actually in some way to be expected. Damien Hardwick, of the coach of the Richmond Football Club, when they lost their preliminary final last year to Collingwood, it was a real shock. Everyone thought they were so good they were going to roll into the grand final and have a fantastic win. They'd win their second premiership in a row. Everyone thought there might be a really forensic investigation of that loss to Collingwood in the preliminary final, and there wasn't. Hardwick brought these players together, and his two-word examination of the match was, shit happens. And it does. Yeah, these things are, and if we're constantly comparing ourselves to other people, by the way, comparison is the second key to misery. First is having big expectations, and the second is comparison. And you think about the way that plays out in teams. If people in teams are constantly comparing each other, and one person's the best, one person's the one that sucks, one person's in the middle just trying to make sure they're not either, then there's a really big chance that a lot of people, basically everyone who's not the one that's the best, is wandering around miserable. So organisations and teams that have miserable, selfish, people who are lacking in empathy, people who are lacking in compassion, people who have not practiced being able to understand, they are the teams who fail, because they're in competition externally and internally. And what we want to do is to understand that there can be some competition externally, but if you really want to win, you better understand that some shit happens. It's not anybody's fault, and get better at being able to conduct ourselves better as we work together. And so what that's really about is knowing and understanding how people learn to eventually become people. And we're going to work through today 4 different pieces of evolution, but I think that if you start very simply, you've got to start with the chimp on the cell phone there with the banana. You've got to start with meaning. You've got to understand the meaning behind conduct. If you want to actually go further than that, you need to understand the context. You need to be clear about why is it not only happening, why is this person doing this, but you need to understand why they're doing it here. Then we start to flip over and we start to become human, and we think about what's the language of really fantastic and productive conduct in an organisation. And then finally we can talk about what are the motivators. What are the things that stand strongly and proudly as being the reasons for which people behave a certain way? Now, I believe that if you know those four key things, and you can build a really simple belief set around that that's useful, that you will start to do some really cool stuff in being able to be that Machiavellian manipulator of behaviour that you'd really like to be. So let's get started, Let's get into it. The first thing you need to know is the meaning behind conduct. You need to know why a person might be doing that. And what we believe through most of the frames, I guess one of the things that I did when I was a teacher, I had the chance at one stage in a leadership role to be in charge when I was living and working in the Northern Territory. I was in charge of behaviour and wellbeing across all Northern Territory schools. That was interesting because there's some really quite quirky behaviours happening in some of the far-flung corners of the Northern Territory schools. And I realised I was operating from what I would call a really implicit framework. I really was just saying, oh, have you tried this? Because I've tried it before. That might be useful to you. And that wasn't good enough. So I read widely around human behaviour and conduct and tried to find out as much as I could. And then I tried to distill it down to some bite-sized pieces that people would be able to that teachers would be able to consume. And it came down to this for me. I reckon that there are three main reasons that people are doing what they're doing. In a workplace, I think first of all, they do things that allow them to get things. So the first motivator the first meaning behind a behaviour is somebody's trying to get something. Often in a workplace, it might be that they're trying to get a pay rise, or it might be that they're trying to get recognition. So, they might be trying to do something to get noticed. They might be trying to, could be, schmaltzing up to the boss. It could be working overtime. It could be getting everyone a coffee. They tend to do things because there's something they're trying to get, and it's often associated with a commodity like pay or praise and recognition, as I mentioned before. So it could be that someone's trying to get something. It could be somebody who's trying to avoid something. So that often manifests in the workplace as somebody they might be trying to avoid responsibility. There's people who always who never put their hand up to do certain tasks or to work on certain projects. And I've got to admit, I think that there's a part of that in all of us. We avoid responsibility in a variety of different ways. I think about my home and what I do to try and avoid responsibility sometimes in my home. I don't like having the responsibility of stacking the dishwasher in my home. So what I tend to do is, I think it's quite inherent in me to stack the dishwasher the wrong way, but Anthea is very big on the dishwasher needing to be stacked a certain way. And I've started to get my handle on how it is that she wants it packed that way, yet I still rarely pack it that way because I don't want the responsibility of packing the dishwasher perfectly all the time. I just want to be able to chuck stuff in there. So there's a little bit of human nature there in what I say when people are trying to avoid responsibility. We tend to slip to blame really quickly. It was, he's being a lazy ass, or he's being a pain in the neck. The problem with when we go to those labels, particularly negative labels for people, is what do you do with it? There's no manual on pain in the neckness or, pain in the arseness that we can defer to about how we do that. But if we can say, I think this person's trying to avoid responsibility, what we can actually do is get a great grip on the meaning of a behaviour and say, okay, I think that's what it's all about. Another thing that people will try and avoid in the workplace is failure. A lot of workplaces, and we know this, we hear a lot of mantras and metaphors and slogans about you have to accept failure, and the word fail is really just an acronym for first attempt in learning. That's really great, a poster, but in real life people are quite failure averse. And if you build a workplace that exacerbates that, what you'll find is that people will retract further inward. They will avoid taking on work, not because they're being lazy, but because they are utterly petrified of getting it wrong and what that will mean when they do. The feeling that comes along when we fail in a workplace, it tends to be shame. We're ashamed of ourselves, we're embarrassed, we're humiliated, and we respond as human beings quite often negatively to that. We act badly. We either attack other people, we turn on ourselves, we withdraw and just take the next 3 days off sick, or we often avoid, which means that you'll have people in your workplace that might be ducking home every day and needing to hit the bottle because they just want to avoid that feeling of shame. They just need a few hours where they don't feel that way. When that becomes a habit of people's lives, that's a real concern for us. So we could have people who are trying to get something, people who are trying to avoid something, and then you get people who behave a certain way because they're trying to achieve something. And that's often progress. People are hooked on progress. So if I can give you a really practical tip here, if you're trying to help a team complete a project, mapping out the steps of that project and putting it up on a wall in the tea room, and allowing people to tick off those steps when they get done is a fantastic way to get people motivated around progress. We are obsessed with the scoreboard, and the scoreboard for no other reason than it gives us a really strong sense of progress. And the other thing that people are really motivated to achieve is task completion. I don't know about you, but I'm a bit of a list writer, and I've got a habit of writing things in my daily diary that I've already done, just because then I can tick them immediately. There's a little glimpse into my psychosis, and I think that it's really important that we give people the opportunity to celebrate completion, celebrate getting things done, and to actually pause to do that rather than move on to the next project. Now, if you can say, first of all, right, if you can look at a certain behaviour that you're getting from an employee, a team member, somebody that you're trying to lead, and say, the first thing I need to understand is what's the meaning, what are they trying to get, avoid, or achieve? And we can ask that honestly. We drag ourselves away from what I call low road kind of assessments, where we say, you know, oh, he's been a pain in the neck. Oh, that's why. Well, that's great. You're just not going to be able to do anything about it. If you can say, you know what, I think he's actually trying to avoid, you know, failing here. I could get him started if I add a little support to this. You know, what's the part of it that he's most worried he's going to get wrong? Or is it that, you know, he's actually trying to get recognised here for doing some good work? Right. We need to find a way to make sure that we publicly acknowledge what he's doing so that he can be motivated to do more of it. Or if you can say, you know what, they're just trying to feel like they're telling us things like, you know, I feel like I'm banging my head against a brick wall. Well, they just haven't seen the progress that they've made. And we often from the outside we go, but this is so much better than it used to be. Yeah, I don't know, but we've still got so many problems. We've got to make the progress visible for people. Hugely important. Now, like I said, when we're still in chimp land here, we're understanding the meaning behind behaviour, but then also the context. So why is a behaviour happening that somebody trying to get, avoid, or achieve? And then why is it happening here? Why is it happening in this circumstance? I go back to trying to run performance conversations with people. There's a great behaviour to try and get people to demonstrate, isn't it, productively? And I remember doing it when I was a school principal with a fellow called Mick. And Mick, I would bring him into my office, say, mate, let's do your performance conversation. I'll just open up the template that we need to work on, and we'll have a chat. We'll fill it out as we go. And I would look across the table, and Mick was sweating. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? And I said, mate, what's the problem? What do you? Yeah. He goes, oh, I don't know. I just don't know this. And he couldn't even articulate for me really what the problem was. And I sat down and I thought, what's going on here? Why is Mick like this whenever I try? Because he's you know, competent teacher. You know, he'd be right. You know, what's he worried about? I'm a nice bloke. I don't get this. And eventually Mick revealed to me one day that he himself, when he was at school, Mick sort of came to teaching late in his career, and when he was at school himself, the principal's office was a pretty scary place. It was a place where he found himself often, and he found himself mistreated often. So even 25 years later, being asked to come and sit in the principal's office with me just brought back some really nasty stuff for him. Michael Grinder, a fantastic observer of human behaviour, calls this contamination of space. So he says that once something happens in a certain place, it's very difficult for people to shake the feelings, the affects that are associated with that place when they're there. And if you think about that in your lives, that's utterly true. I know that when I find myself back in a place that might be happy, I know that when I walk into my parents' house and they're still living in the house that I grew up in, when I walk back in there's automatically just a feeling that comes over me of safety and comfort. It's just a really nice place to be. I know that when I used to walk into an office of a boss who really ripped into me one day. And to be honest, it was one negative interaction in 3 years of work with this person. But every time I walked back into that office, I saw that chair that I sat in the day that she ripped into me, and those feelings associated with that came back. So I started to think about, what am I going to do here? What do I need to do about Mick? And I went, well, he's good with the conversation, so it's not a behaviour thing. It's actually the fact that it's here, that it's in my office. So a couple of weeks after a failed performance conversation that, you know, we really didn't get anything done, I said, mate, can I buy you a beer? And he said, yeah, no worries, because Mick loved a beer. And so we trotted up to the Palmerston Tavern and we sat down and I started to chat with him about how he was going in his work. About 10 minutes into the conversation, Mick said, is this a performance conversation? And I said, well, should I just get the laptop out and fill in the form? And he goes, yeah, fucking might as well. Righto. That's how important context is. If you look at the behaviour in isolation and don't think about what's around you, you are absolutely kidding yourself. Why have I got fairy bread on the screen? My wonderful daughter, Ebony, who turned 19 yesterday, so please don't tell her I'm talking about her in events like this. She'd be mortified. When she was 3, she gave me the perfect example of how context manipulates behaviour. We had her 3rd birthday party and people arrive. And all of a sudden, Anthea and I looked over at Ebony and she was walking around, walking up to people with plates of food, walking up to people with drinks and saying please, saying thank you. We actually weren't aware that she'd learned these words. Hair pulled back, neat as a pin, and she had her best dress on. I went, what's going on here? And as people left the party, they walked past Anthea and I and they said things to us like, you know what, it must be such a pleasure to raise a child like Ebony. And through gritted teeth, Anthea and I said, yes, thank you. Because you see, the context was about to change again. There was the context change when people showed up, and then there's another context change when people left. And everybody left, and I looked at Anthea, and Anthea looked at me, and she said, how long do you think we've got? And Anthea agreed it was about 40 seconds because Ebony threw a giant tantrum because we wouldn't let her have her 15th piece of fairy bread for the day. That would not have happened with those other people in the room. Context drives behaviour at a level to which we are horribly underprepared to admit. So we really need to get clear about why is a certain behaviour happening here. If you set up a learning experience, if you need to deliver a workshop to people and what you do is get everyone to sit in rows, then expect them to be bored and to slump in their chairs and to not say anything, because that's the same context as a cinema. That's what you do in a cinema. You sit there and you look to the front and you either switch into what the entertainment is, which means you'd better be rock star good at the front of the room, or you just switch off and you demonstrate either passive or very active disengagement for the person at the front of the room. If you set up a learning environment, if you need to run a workshop where people are sitting in groups, or even if you've got a smaller amount where people are sitting in a circle, you are sending a message to people that we're going to do the learning, the work and the education together, rather than I'm going to do the education to you and you're going to be quite passive in that. Of course, if they don't get passive, then you'll find that person who's usually sitting at the back who decides that they're going to go you. They're going to yell out and they're going to challenge you, because let's be honest, that room architecture is set up like a battlefield. Think about your meeting spaces. Think about if you've got a tea room, for instance, and it's got the one big long table. You might have somebody who's sitting at the head of that table who's been sitting there for 20 years and they hold court. They make sure that certain things are said, certain things are agreed, and certain things are suppressed. Set your tea room up like a cafe. Little tables, so that people can actually have lots of little pockets of conversation, and so people can move from day to day without special spots. That's how much the context impacts behaviour, and how little we think about it. It amazes me every single time. Now, if you want to get human here. Now, so really simply, the combo of meaning and context means that you'll take that high road where you'll look at a behaviour, you'll understand it, you'll recognise what it's all about, and you'll do something that I would consider to be a response. Responses are usually thought out. The combo, if you refuse to do that, I think that what will happen is you'll look at it and you'll say that they're being a pain in the neck, you'll have an emotional reaction to it, and it's rather than respond, you will react. And your reactions tend to be emotional and wrong. So I really want to encourage you, first of all, while we're in chimp land, to remember that if there's one thing you're going to take out of today, it should be that every behaviour has a meaning and every behaviour has a context. And if you can do that much, you're going to make a really great start. The next thing, if you want to get human about the whole thing, is to start to look at language. So I mentioned before when I quoted Daniel Goleman that he reckons that empathy is really low in competitive environments where people are incredibly selfish. So what I want you to do is to start to think about how it is that you would increase empathy. How would you build more empathic people? How did you learn? to be empathic or compassionate or understanding. I'm wondering, did mum or dad sit you down one night and give you the empathy conversation, the way they would give you the birds and the bees conversation? I don't think so. You see, the birds and the bees conversation, that's something that you didn't know before, but you did after, or maybe you did know before. But it's content related. You need to know what that's all about, and there's a moment that comes when you cross over from not knowing to knowing. So it's knowledge. It's been handed on to you by your parents or by somebody else, or by Playboy magazine, if that might be the case. And empathy is not knowledge. Empathy is a condition. Empathy is a capability, and you learn those far more gradually. You actually learn them very informally. There's where a lot of organisations that run special days that might be around, right, we're going to do our professional learning day today. We're going to learn about resilience, and leaders go, great, because once we've done resilience for a day, everyone will be resilient. And it's bullshit because you don't learn resilience from a day. It's not knowledge. It's a capability. It's a quality. It's a characteristic, and you learn them bit by bit by bit by bit. The way you learn something bit by bit by bit by bit is to be immersed in a culture that lives it. Now, culture is a really interesting thing, and when if I were to ask anyone on the webinar today, put your hand up if you think that culture is important. Everyone will. But then defining what it is another thing. Culture, the most important thing you need to know about culture is that language drives it. Language is in fact an input and an output of culture. What I mean by that is that if you're a leader and you're looking to build a fantastic culture, the words that you use to lead that culture will eventually drive what becomes important in that culture. And on the other side of it, you will hear words as an output from the people that you're working with that reflect that you've built that sort of culture. Now, this sounds really complicated, but if I were to tell you that it's just there's a really simple trick you can use here in your language that will cue people into being more empathic, and all you need to do is that all you need to do when low-level annoying things happen in your workplace is invest a second of your time. Would you take it up? So what I want you to focus on as a leader, if you're looking to manipulate the language and the culture of your organisation, is what we call effective language. And effective language, you'll notice here I'm talking affective, not effective language. Doesn't mean that it works, it means that it's about feelings. And for big blokey blokes like me, that's a challenge. But I've been able to manipulate this in such a way and to get really crafty at it that it really eliminates a lot of the challenging behaviours that I experience. I learned about this in my time as a teacher. So I'm wondering if you can think about a lot of the low-level annoying behaviours that exist in a culture where there's kids involved. There can be a lot. So one might be a kid that drops a piece of rubbish on the ground. Now, for me, when I see a kid drop a piece of rubbish on the ground, my default used to be what most of you would say to that kid is, hey, pick that up. Been able to change that. It's taken work, but now it's a new default for me. I have a new default. I don't say that anymore. What I say to that kid, cost me about a second of my time, is I say to them, disappoints me to see you do that. You need to put that in the bin. And if I were to get you to repeat back to me on the count of three, what's the word you heard me say the loudest? It's 1, 2, 3. I will back it in that nearly everybody on this webinar today will say disappointed. These are the two key components of our brain, the neocortex and the limbic system. Neocortex, if you want to summarise its job, it's for thinking. Limbic system, its job is for feeling. And it's there. What we've done there is we've got them to coordinate. We've got them to work together. The feelings word is the thing we hear the loudest. The neocortex processes, and the way that it processes it says, hang on, my behaviour affected someone else. Really? Right. So I'm often telling parents that if they want their teenager to clean their room, stop nagging, just walk into the room, look around the space and go, this is really disappointing, and walk out. And unfortunately, I don't get the payoff of being able to see their face, but I can bet it's got that WTF kind of expression on it. And what they're doing in their head is going, really, what was that all about? She's upset about me, right? Oh God, okay, I don't want to upset her. I better do something about it. And we actually increase the chance of them doing something about it. Now, if you can say to someone, I'm just really frustrated you haven't handed that report in on time, and shut up. Just let that sit there. And if you can also say to people, you know what, I'm really delighted with the way you helped Sam out with his difficulties yesterday. And just let it sit there. Let it be what it is. What you do over time is you emphasize to people in your team that in our organisation, because I lead it and I'm demonstrating that through my language, in our organisation, we care about the way that what we do affects other people. It drives up what Goleman's speaking about there in terms of empathy and compassion. And this, if you can get this going, this sounds so ridiculous, doesn't it? But if you can get this going, this will allow you to build a really strong cooperative competitive advantage in your teams. They'll work together because the language reflects a culture that says we work together. Rather than just allowing people who've been conditioned to look out for number one to gather under the one ceiling. Hugely important stuff, hugely important stuff. So it sounds so incredibly small that sometimes you think it couldn't have much of an impact, but if you were to think as a leader, how often in a day's work you would be able to say what you were already saying, but just chuck in a feelings word, positive or negative. I reckon you could think of a lot. And I can tell you now that it will trigger a different level of cognizance and activity in the brains of the people that you work with. It's quite amazing. If you want to get your leadership team good at this will sound even double. I'm going to double down on the ridiculousness here for you. Stand up with a colleague who's a fellow leader and do your training for effective language. So what I mean by that is actually hold a pretend tennis racket and a pretend tennis ball in your hand and hit a feelings word over the net at them. So hit, disappointed. And if they've got 3 seconds to hit a word back, so they've got to say frustrated. Then you're going to say delighted. And then they're going to say annoyed. And then you're going to say happy. And keep going until one of you either repeats a word or can't come up with a word in 3 seconds. Yay, 15 love. So have a bit of practice at it. If you can make this the cultural feature, language, as I said, an input and output of culture of your organisation, then you are going to change the culture of your organisation. And then finally, understanding what the motivators are of conduct is incredibly important. This, I want to admit that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here. A fabulous behavioural psychologist called Joe Lang presented a model to me around understanding the motivators behind the way people work. So I talked before about meaning, about why they do certain things, and then when we get into motivators, we go, okay, what's going to really, what's this person really after here? So another model that I think can be really useful for you. Lang says that people are either looking for help, okay, and they have this t-shirt on. She says that we should picture our people as wearing t-shirts. And the first one has this label on it of help me. They look for rescue when they only need support. If you think about the difference between those two words, rescue and support, there are probably people that you lead who look for rescue when the truth is they don't need it. In fact, rescue is really for life or death situations. Rescue is for when I'm bobbing around in the ocean and the Westpac helicopter is hovering above me, and I certainly don't need support at that point. I do not need someone in the chopper going, Adam, this is the way you do freestyle. I am, get that bloody ladder down here and get me out of here. I need rescue at that point. But there are very few situations at your work where it's life or death. So the truth is most of the circumstances that you find yourself in are where people require support to get started. Yet, people who wear the help me t-shirt, they've got awesome excuses. So they try to drag you in to over-supporting, to tipping over into rescue. They say things like, yeah, I know, I've just been really under the pump lately. That's why I haven't got it done. Oh, yeah, I know, the missus is a bit sick at the moment. Oh, the kid, I haven't been sleeping very well. And, you always ask this of me, but I don't know, Barry hasn't got his report in yet either. And I'm so tired and, this is ridiculous. And eventually we just go, oh, look, fine, give it here. Because the motto of the leader who loves it to rescue is if you want something done right, you've got to do it yourself. You don't. In fact, what you need to do is to start asking smart questions of help me people about what it is that they actually need help or support with. So when somebody says to me, yeah, look, I just haven't got that report in because I've been really tired lately and I just haven't had enough time, really. I just say, well, which part of it do you need the most assistance with? And shut up. let them answer. Because if the question is about compartmentalising, rather than having to take the whole thing off them, you could say, okay, that's the bit, no worries, I can sit down with you at 11:30 and give you half an hour to work through that. Yeah, that'll be great. All right, cool, we'll get it done. We'll be able to knock it off by 4 o'clock this afternoon then. Terrific. Compartmentalise and make sure that you're providing support, not rescue. Second T-shirt that Lang says is that people choose to put themselves in the spotlight as a motivator of conduct. And look, it's not a bad thing for people to seek our positive regard, but Lang calls these people, when it comes to perhaps having a meeting, she calls them triple L's. She says they're late, they're loud, they're laughing. So they make a scene as they come in, and they carry on and do a little dance. And what we need to understand is that when we provide them with the currency that they're looking for, so the currency for these people is eyeballs. When we look at them, when we give them the attention they're looking for, even if it's to chastise them or to criticise them, we're giving them exactly what they're looking for. So we need to make sure that we remove that. I find that the effective language that just says, really disappointed you're late, but thanks for coming, and then look away and just get on with the meeting, is a really useful thing. Because what I think that does is, if we just ignore, I think that what happens is the look at me people up the ante, and they get louder and they get more annoying. But if they've gone to, I often think about that currency notion, if they've gone to $1 worth of effort to get a whole heap of eyeballs and they only get 5 cents of reward, then they kind of sit there and go, oh, that wasn't quite worth it. Now, one of the things you can do with people who are attention seekers is make sure that you over provide attention when they do the right thing. So it's about a balancing act here. It's about saying, if you've got people who are doing the right thing, make sure you overpraise them. And if you've got people who are doing the wrong thing, that their motivator is attention, then just give them 5 cents worth. Just enough that they know you saw, but you ain't paying. A third motivator is people who try to make me. They're into power struggles. They love arguments, and they find it very difficult to take direction from authority. So what we want to do is to shift our authority. Now, what I mean is there's 2 types of authority you can take. Number one is you could be an authoritarian leader who tries to make people do things, and these people just go bring it on. So you'll come up with something, I'll tell you why it's a horrible idea. You'll say, well, you have to do it anyway. They'll go make me. Okay. And what they've got is, even in a meeting, what they've managed to manipulate you into is a tennis match. You're hitting one thing over the net and they're hitting it back. It doesn't matter what you actually throw at them, they're going to hit it back harder and stronger. Why? Because we've given them exactly what they want. People who invite us into power struggles, they do so not because they want to win the power struggle. They do it because they just love to have it. It makes them feel incredibly powerful to, in front of other people, prove that they can manipulate you into playing a game of tennis with them. And to be honest, I don't know about you, but I'm not going to go and play tennis against Roger Federer, because I'm going to get my backside kicked every single time. It's the habit of these people's lives. So what we need to do is say, right, I'm not going to be authoritarian with you. I still want to be authority. I'm leading, but how can I be authoritative rather than authoritarian? And what we mean is that we're going to frame expectations as care. So when someone says, you can't make me do this crap, you just go, yeah, absolutely right, I can't make you. But if you need the extra time after hours for me to sit down with you and work through with you so you can get it done, I care enough about you being successful that I will give you that time. And you'll note that I haven't framed the expectation lower. So I could try and make them. I could say, well, if you don't get it done, you'll have to stay after hours. Or I can say, well, I'll frame that expectation as care and support. And people who are into power struggles, I can give this as a little bit of psychological manipulation that I think everybody should be aware of. People who are into power struggles, they absolutely hate it when you care on them publicly. So do it. And then the final T-shirt that Lang refers to is your pay. And these, to be honest, it's becoming more and more prevalent and important today than it ever has been before. And that is, we've got people who are damaged. And they're the people who do nonsensical things as acts of revenge. You think you've got and built a fantastic relationship with them. You think you're making progress. You think everything's going fine, and then you have one disagreement, and they go out and they, key your car or something like that on the way out from work that day, and it just doesn't seem to add up. It doesn't make sense. And they're often people who are wearing more than one t-shirt, and they're often people who are really struggling to be able to, who are really struggling with multiple aspects of their lives. So there may be a physiological, there may be a psychological, there may be an environmental challenge or a family challenge in that person's life that's that's making it way too difficult for them to choose behaviours that are at work, the behaviours that are productive at work. My suggestion to you, if you get people who are in that situation, is don't try and fix them. You're not a mental health expert. Don't try and manipulate your way around them. But if you go, this is nonsensical, what's going on here, be an agent, which means help them get to the help that they need. So a lot of organisations, a lot of businesses have access to counselling and mental health services these days. It can be accessed without it being too big an impost on your budget. Help them. You know, be the sort of leader that says that if I can recognise you're wearing that t-shirt, I'm going to point you towards the sort of people that are great at being able to get those t-shirts off. Give them a hand. And I think that that's not a bad note for us to finish up on, is wherever we can, give your people a hand. I've given you today some beliefs around the way that you could manipulate conduct in your workplace. And it sounds almost like the people on the other end of that manipulation are going to resist it, or they're not going to like it. They are. They're really going to like it. You start using effective language. You start thinking about what motivates people. You start creating a context for conduct where people succeed. And if you start understanding that people are not being pains in the neck, they're just trying to get, avoid, or achieve something, they're going to start thanking you for it. You're going to feel like you're the evil mastermind taking over the world. They're going to think you're the greatest boss that's ever been. So know that this is a win-win situation for all of the people that you're involved in if you can take this on board. Hey, a couple of things before you go. Number one is that our next webinar is going to be on Thursday, the 17th of October, just a couple of weeks, and it's going to be about creative thinking. Not many people do it. Most people come to work and they look for compliant thinking. They deploy as a habit. They go, okay, what do I need to do? And they say, I'll do that. And they never think, is there a better way? Is there a different way? Should I be doing this? They don't interrogate the level of thinking, which means that most organisations perform at pretty much the same level. Organisations that genuinely foster creativity and innovation, and I know when I say that word innovation, man, it can cause some eye rolling. I'm not going to talk to you in this webinar about the usual innovations, which most people tend to believe is more work. What I'm going to talk to you about is a disruptive innovation, a way of changing things, a way of making things simpler, a way of making things stand out for people, a way of cutting through the crap and minimising the guff that people have to deal with in a compliance-focused world. So we're going to look at how do we innovate when most people are complying, when we're doing this thinking. And that's a webinar that I really want to encourage you to come along. I think it could be a game changer for you and your organisation. Before you go, can I encourage you to download the slide deck from today? So as a reward for coming along today, in the GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a handout section. If you duck in there now as I'm finishing up, you'll see that the slide deck from the webinar is sitting there for you. I really want you to have that as my gift, as my thank you for coming along today. And enjoy it. I hope that it can be a reference for you moving forward. Hey, if you'd like to discuss today's webinar, then give me a yell. Personally, you can get me at the email address you can see at the top there. And if you're looking to just inquire more about what we do with Real Learners, then you've got those details at the bottom there, or there's the 1300 number that you can get us on as well. Hey, that'll do you. Thanks so much for coming along. I hope you've really enjoyed talking about or listening to me talk about my 25-year professional thesis on human conduct, and I look forward to meeting you again in a couple of weeks. Have a bit of a chat about creative thinking. Okay, bye for now.